The worst disaster in human history was the only reason the modern world survived. In 1347, Europe was a ticking time bomb. 73 million people crammed into filthy cities, too many mouths, too little land. The soil was completely exhausted. Then, the Black Death wiped out half the population. We look at this as a tragedy, but scientifically, it was a brutal reset button that saved Western civilization. Think of Europe back then like an overcrowded life raft. It carried double the weight it could handle. The plague was the wave that swept half the passengers away, allowing the raft to float. Now, change one detail. Imagine a massive autumn storm in 1347. It batters the Mediterranean. The merchant ships carrying infected fleas get blown off course. They sink. The bacteria dies in the cold ocean. No Black Death. No mass graves. At first, everyone celebrates. The busy markets of Venice, Genoa, and London stay packed, but the clock is ticking. By 1355, the food runs out completely. The overused fields cannot feed 73 million people anymore. Famine strikes. Not a quick death, but a slow, agonizing starvation that lasts decades. In the real world, losing millions of workers forced landowners to compete for survivors. They had to pay higher wages. They had to offer freedom. This broke the back of feudalism. In our alternate timeline, that never happens. Because labor remains cheap, peasants have zero leverage. Landlords keep wages at pennies. The feudal system locks down tighter than ever. Without a labor shortage, there is no reason to invent labor-saving machines. Why build a water mill or a printing press when you can pay 50 starving peasants to do the work manually? No printing press means ideas stay locked in monasteries. No industrial engines means we never leave the wooden age. The Renaissance never starts because there is no surplus wealth to fund minds like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo. Europe remains trapped in a permanent, starving dark age. By escaping its deadliest tragedy, Europe dooms itself to slow, permanent decay. The lack of a crisis prevents the innovations that built our modern lives. History is a delicate web of catastrophes. Sometimes, the monsters we escape are the only forces keeping us from a far worse fate. If those ships had sunk in that storm, you wouldn't be holding the phone you are using to watch this right now. One violent storm in the Mediterranean Sea once saved 50 million lives. Think about that. A single night of wild wind and heavy rain completely rewrote human history. It is autumn in the year 1347. The Mediterranean is the busiest highway on Earth. Every week, wooden merchant ships cross these waters. They carry silk from China, spices from India, glass from Egypt, silver from Byzantium. Every successful voyage makes a port city richer. But on this specific night, one fleet carries a hidden killer. Deep inside the dark wooden cargo holds, beneath heavy sacks of grain, thousands of infected fleas are hiding on black rats. No sailor can see them. No captain knows they are there. No doctor of the medieval era understands how microscopic bacteria spread. If these ships land in Europe, the Black Death will wipe out 50% of the population. Then, the weather turns. Dark clouds swallow the horizon. The sea rises up. Without warning, a massive storm hits the fleet. Towering waves crash over the wooden decks. Masts snap. Sails rip. The rain falls so hard, the captains cannot see 20 feet ahead. The convoy scatters. One ship loses its rudder. Another starts sinking. For 3 straight days, the storm rages. The captains face a brutal choice: keep sailing toward Europe and drown, or turn around. Save the crew. Save the cargo. No one argues. No merchant is willing to die for grain. The fleet turns back east, away from Sicily, away from Genoa, away from Venice. The plague turns around with them. Thousands of miles away, Europe sleeps. People wake up in Venice like any other morning. Fishermen bring in their catch. The smell of fresh bread drifts through the narrow streets. Merchants open their shops. Blacksmiths heat up their furnaces. Children run through the alleys. Nobody has any idea how close they came to destruction. Months pass, then years. The deadly sickness never arrives. Trade booms across the continent. Harvests are record-breaking year after year. Cities grow larger, louder, and wealthier. Kings celebrate record tax revenues. Merchants build larger warehouses. Farmers clear new forests to create more fields. Everything suggests Europe is entering its greatest age. An old monk, riding inside a monastery, looks out across the countryside. He smiles. The Lord has blessed this land. Many believe him. Perhaps they should not, because history has removed one disaster, only to make room for another. The camera rises above Europe. From Spain to Poland, from England to Italy, cities glow with life. The continent has escaped its darkest chapter, without realizing that the future has already changed. The first page of another history has just been written. The storm did not save Europe. It merely traded a quick, painful death for a slow, agonizing decline. Sometimes, the worst events that happen to us are the exact events that keep us alive. The next time a storm ruins your plans, remember the year 1347. The rain might be saving you from a far worse fate. The Black Death is the only reason you have weekends. When 75 million people died in 1348, it forced kings to pay survivors higher wages. But what if that nightmare never happened? Imagine winter in 1348. Europe waited for the sickness. It never came. The ports stayed open. The roads stayed busy. Life continued, exactly as it always had. At first, nobody noticed. How could they? You do not celebrate escaping a disaster you never knew was coming. Spring arrived. The fields turned green. Farmers planted. Children were born. Markets welcomed new merchants. Everything felt normal. Year after year, the population kept growing. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. New homes spilled outside ancient stone walls. Blacksmiths worked day and night. Carpenters never rested. Masons built new bridges and massive marketplaces. Europe was growing larger, richer, and busier. Kings looked across their lands with pride. To a medieval ruler, more people meant more workers. More workers meant bigger harvests. Bigger harvests meant more taxes. More taxes meant larger armies. Every king believed the future belonged to whoever could build the biggest kingdom. But they were wrong. Dead wrong. In our timeline, the Black Death changed everything. Millions died, making workers scarce. For the first time, peasants had leverage. They demanded higher wages. Landowners lost their absolute power. Feudalism began to crack. But in this alternate world, nobody disappeared. There was always another worker, always another farmer, always another desperate family looking for a tiny patch of dirt. If you wanted to leave your lord's land, 3 people stood behind you, ready to work it for half the price. The nobles never lost control. The balance of power never shifted. Generation after generation, the old system remained frozen in place. The church became stronger than ever. Every Sunday, the cathedrals overflowed. Priests spoke of God's blessing. They saw growing harvests, healthy families, peaceful cities. Prosperity was proof that heaven smiled upon Europe. Few questioned the old traditions. Few challenged ancient beliefs. In Venice, the harbors grew massive. More ships arrived. More goods piled up on the docks. Warehouses stretched for miles along the canals. Trade expanded past anything the world had ever seen. Merchants smiled. Business had never been better. One young trader stood on the docks, studying the crowded harbor. His father placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. He told the boy that the sea brings wealth, but it also has limits. The young man laughed. Everything was growing. Why should it stop? But the old man had lived long enough to understand something. Nothing grows forever. Across Europe, the forests began to disappear. Trees fell to make room for new farms. Fields expanded. Villages spread farther into the wilderness. Land slowly became the most valuable thing a family could own. Then the first signs appeared. Not disease, not war, but scarcity. A village needed more land. Arguments became fights. Fights became bloodshed. Small, brutal conflicts broke out across the countryside, not because of hatred, but because there were simply too many people living on the same dirt. History had avoided one tragedy. Now, it quietly prepared another. The camera rises high above Europe. The continent looks stronger than ever before. But beneath its prosperity, pressure is building. Invisible. Silent. Growing with every passing year. The pressure kept building. Silent. Invisible. Growing with every single birth. If we do not let systems break naturally, they do not stay safe. They wait to explode. Think about that next time you wish for a world without disruptions. If you do not let systems break naturally, they do not stay safe. They wait to explode. Think about that next time you wish for a world without disruptions. In 1355, Europe was suffering from a massive crisis of being too successful 8 years after the plague failed to wipe out the population. Every single kingdom was bursting at the seams. We usually think growth is positive. More people, more cities, more wealth. But in the medieval world, unchecked growth was a slow-motion disaster. By 1355, Europe had become the most crowded continent it had ever been. Every kingdom grew. Every city pushed past its stone walls. The roads were packed with merchants. The markets hummed with noise. The fields crawled with millions of workers for the kings of Europe. This looked like a golden age. Every new family paid taxes. Every new village sent soldiers. Every single harvest filled the royal treasuries to the brim. The crowns of Europe had never held so much wealth. In our real timeline, the Black Death killed millions. It was a dark era, but that tragedy created a massive labor shortage. Because workers were scarce, they became valuable. Peasants demanded higher wages. They demanded freedom. The old feudal system began to break apart because the poor finally had leverage. But in this alternative timeline, nothing changed. There was no labor shortage. There were always more workers, more farmers, more hungry families, searching for a tiny patch of dirt. The nobles kept their absolute power. The peasants had zero leverage. The old order stood firm across France. Massive castles rose toward the sky. Across England, heavy stone walls protected wealthy estates. Princes expanded their borders across the Holy Roman Empire. No ruler feared running out of men. Human life was cheap. Labor was endless. The church grew alongside the kings. Monasteries multiplied. Thousands of people joined massive pilgrimages. Towering cathedrals reached heights never seen before. People genuinely believed God had favored Europe. How else could they explain years of prosperity without famine? But this wealth hid a terrifying reality. Think of a medieval kingdom like a wooden bridge. Adding more people is like piling heavy stones onto that bridge. It looks massive and impressive from a distance, but underneath, the wooden beams are bending. One extra stone will cause the entire structure to snap. That is what happened to the land. More people required more food. More food required more fields. Forests vanished completely. Marshes were drained. Hillsides were cleared of trees to make room for barley. Every square inch of soil became precious. Landowners fought viciously over single acres. Small property disputes turned into armed skirmishes. Neighbors became bitter rivals, not because they wanted war, but because there simply was not enough land left to feed everyone. Meanwhile, the cities grew out of control. Venice, Paris, London, Florence, Prague, their narrow streets became suffocating. Markets overflowed with desperate people. City walls could no longer hold the population. Outside the gates, massive slums appeared overnight. Consider London. In our world, the plague cleared out the slums here. The slums are choking the River Thames. The water is black, the air smells like rot. Builders could not keep. The greatest intellectual leap in human history was triggered by 75 million rotting corpses. We like to think the Renaissance was a clean triumph of pure human genius. It was not. It was a desperate, chaotic rebuild forced by the Black Death. But what if that pandemic never happened? Imagine the year 1375. 3 decades have passed since the non-existent plague. Europe is wealthier than it has ever been. Cities are expanding. Kingdoms are thriving. The cathedrals are magnificent, and the population is soaring. Everything looks perfect, but underneath the surface, human progress has ground to a halt. In our timeline, the plague destroyed the old world. It forced people to question their kings, their priests, and their ancient books. Universities still teach the exact same texts they taught 3 centuries ago. Students learn to preserve old knowledge, not challenge it. Innovation still happens, sure, but it moves like molasses. There is no desperate labor shortage. In our timeline, the loss of millions of workers meant survivors could demand higher wages. Feudalism collapsed because landlords had to compete for workers. To save money, people had to invent labor-saving machines. Think of it like a dense, ancient forest. If no trees ever die, the massive old oaks block all the sunlight. The Black Death was a horrific forest fire. It cleared the canopy. It let light reach the ground. In Florence, artists still paint beautiful frescoes. Architects still design massive domes. Writers still fill libraries. But their work is safe. Wealthy elites fund them to celebrate the existing power structure, not challenge it. Kings invest gold in stone monuments, not risky experiments. Meanwhile, the great intellectual hubs of Alexandria, Constantinople, and Baghdad keep trading with Europe. Ideas move across the Mediterranean, but they spread slowly, like ink in cold water. There is no sudden explosion of translation, no printing press revolution. In our world, the sudden drop in scribes made copying books expensive. This created a massive incentive for Johannes Gutenberg to build his press in 1440. But here, monasteries are packed with cheap labor. Young men copy manuscripts for a bowl of soup. Gutenberg's workshop never gets funded because nobody needs a machine to do what humans do for free. History chooses patience over revolution. Merchants remain the only real engine of progress. Every new spice route brings a new mathematical technique or a different compass. But these tools are absorbed quietly. They do not trigger a rebellion of the mind. A young scholar in Paris closes a heavy leather manuscript. He looks out his window at the bustling, peaceful streets. He asks, if the world already works, why change it? That single question dominates the continent for the next 200 years. It is a comfortable trap. When survival is guaranteed, curiosity becomes a luxury, not a necessity. We look across a beautiful, stable, alternate Europe. It looks brilliant. It looks confident. But the spark that created our modern world is missing. The desperate need to rebuild from the ashes. Without tragedy, we got stability. But we lost the future. Our greatest achievements did not come from our best moments. They came from our absolute worst. To understand why the modern world looks this way, stop looking at our triumphs. Look at our scars. We like to believe it was not. In our history, it was born from survival. But in this alternate 1405, the pressure was 10 times worse. Here is the truth we usually ignore. The Black Death saved the European economy by wiping out nearly half the population. The plague created a massive surplus of land. For generations, survivors had food, high wages, and room to breathe. But in this timeline, that safety valve never opened. The plague missed. By 1405, Europe had become the ports of Venice, Genoa, and Lisbon never slept. Hundreds of ships jammed the harbors every single month. Trade connected the continents, yes, but trading goods was no longer enough. Europe needed soil. It needed timber. It needed space. The math was simple and brutal. There were now far more mouths than the land could physically feed, so kings stopped looking at their neighbors. They looked at the horizon. The sea ceased to be a terrifying barrier. It became the only escape route left. Shipbuilders in Lisbon began designing heavier, deeper hulls. They built ships that could withstand the massive waves of the deep Atlantic. Navigators threw away old coastal guides. They began mapping the open ocean with mathematical precision. Astronomers spent nights tracking the stars, trying to find a way to guide ships further than anyone had ever dared to sail. This sudden explosion of technology did not happen because Europeans suddenly became curious. It happened because they were desperate. Every single voyage carried a simple promise: find new land or starve. Portugal took the lead. Their sailors pushed south, hugging the coast of Africa. Every ship that returned brought rumors of unknown kingdoms and deep rivers. The impossible became the baseline. Spain watched from the sidelines, terrified of being left behind. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand knew their crown depended on finding new territories. England poured its treasury into shipyards along the Thames. France scrambled to build its own fleets. It was a silent, frantic race, but they were not racing for gold. They were racing for survival. Meanwhile, Venice sat back and smiled. Its merchants still controlled the old trade routes through the Mediterranean. Gold piled up in the canals. Palaces rose from the water. The Venetians believed their wealth made them untouchable. They thought their dominance would last forever. But history has a habit of moving fast when pressure builds. Think of 1405 Europe like a giant steam boiler. If you seal every single valve on land, the steam has to find another way out. The ocean was that final valve. The pressure inside the continent was so high that it shot ships across the Atlantic. The oceans were about to become the largest highways the world had ever seen, and whoever mastered those deep waters would write the rules for the next 500 years. Now, look away from Europe. Cross the Atlantic. Fly over those cold, empty waters. The Americas are still waiting. The people living there have no idea what is coming. But in this timeline, the ships arriving won't be carrying conquistadors looking for gold. They will be carrying millions of desperate, land-hungry families with absolutely nowhere else to go. Entire villages will pack up their lives. Farmers will bring their old wooden plows. Weavers will bring their looms. They will cross the sea, not to conquer, but to settle, to build, to survive. When we look at history, we often credit clever inventors and brave explorers. We build statues to their ambition. But the truth is much simpler. Real progress is rarely driven by a desire to see what is out there. It is driven by the terrifying realization of what happens if we stay. If you want to understand why the modern world looks the way it does, stop looking at the maps of where we went. Look at the crowded rooms we left behind, and the truth we usually ignore is that the future was written by pressure, not just ambition. Europe did not build factories because workers were scarce. In this timeline, 300 years after the plague that never happened, 30 million extra mouths forced inventors to automate. It is the year 1700. Europe survived the Dark Ages without losing half its people. It prospered. More importantly, it multiplied. The population has reached levels that medieval kings could never have imagined. Cities are enormous now. London, Paris, Venice, Amsterdam, Constantinople. Millions of citizens live packed together. They are closer than ever before. Every street overflows with life. Every market stalls under the weight of goods. But there is a massive problem underneath. Every kingdom desperately needs more food, more tools, more production. The old ways cannot support this massive growth. For centuries, Europe relied entirely on human muscle. There had always been enough workers, enough farmers, enough craftsmen, but now, even millions of eager hands are not enough. Factories are starting to appear everywhere, not to replace workers, but because the demand has become impossible to satisfy. Inventors are working day and night. New machines spin cloth 10 times faster. New furnaces forge iron stronger. Steam engines are transforming entire industries. In our history, the Industrial Revolution was a complex puzzle. It needed coal. It needed capital. It needed science. In this timeline, those same elements exist, but they are amplified by 3 centuries of uninterrupted growth. Think of it like a kitchen. If 10 people show up for dinner, you hire another cook. If 10,000 show up, you do not hire more cooks. You build an automated assembly line. The scale of this shift is hard to comprehend. Railways are stretching across kingdoms. They connect cities that used to be weeks apart. Factories are swallowing entire districts. Rivers power thousands of machines at once. Thick smoke rises above every major city. The sky is changing color. The heavy pound of hammers never stops. Prosperity has reached new heights. So did pollution. So did inequality. Millions left the countryside, searching for work, searching for a better life. Entire generations were born inside industrial cities. They had never seen the quiet villages their grandparents remembered. They only know the soot on the windows. They only know the whistle of the morning shift. Power is shifting fast. Kings are no longer the ultimate authority. A new class has taken over. Industrialists, bankers, engineers, merchants. This new elite controls the wealth of nations. The balance of Europe is shifting once again. It is not happening because of a bloody war. It is not happening because of a devastating disease. It is happening because human progress cannot be stopped. Look at the map of this alternate Europe. Railroads web across the entire continent. They cut through mountains. They bridge massive rivers. Factory chimneys dominate the horizon. At night, the cities glow with artificial light. The continent looks stronger than it ever has. It looks invincible, but beneath this massive success, dangerous new rivalries are beginning to form. The struggle for resources is no longer local. Every nation needs coal. Every nation needs iron. They will drag the entire world into a conflict nobody is prepared for. The machines are ready, the factories are running, and the fuse is already lit. We are taught that the First World War was an accident, a lone gunman, a tragic chain reaction of alliances. But that is a lie we tell ourselves to feel safe. The truth is much more terrifying. The longest period of peace and economic growth in European history is exactly what made the slaughter inevitable. Peace did not prevent the war. It built the engine that drove it. Let us look at the numbers. By 1914, Europe ruled the planet. Its factories produced more steel, coal, and textiles than ever before. Its empire stretched across every single continent. Its cities held millions of people living in modern comfort. Its armies had never been larger or better equipped. For hundreds of years, the continent had avoided its worst medieval catastrophes. There were no devastating plagues, No continent-wide famines to reset the population. Generation after generation, Europe kept growing. But growth creates a massive problem. It creates intense competition. You see, when everyone is expanding, space runs out. Competition creates deep, unspoken tension. And tension always finds a way to explode. Every empire wanted more. More land, more colonies, more resources, more influence. Germany expanded its industrial output at a speed that terrified its neighbors. Russia looked west, hungry for warm water ports. Austria-Hungary struggled to hold its fragile mix of nationalities together. Each nation felt squeezed. Each nation felt threatened. Think of Europe in 1914 like a giant steam boiler. Every new factory was more coal in the furnace. Every alliance was another bolt, fastening the lid down tight, but nobody built a safety valve. The system was too powerful, too complex, too rigid. Then, a single gunshot broke the silence in Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand fell. In our timeline, that spark set the entire continent on fire. Because the alliances were incredibly strong, the armies were already fully mobilized. The factories were ready to pivot to mass production. The population was at an all-time high. There was an endless supply of young men to send into the fire. The war that followed was bigger than anyone had ever imagined. Millions of young men marched to the front lines. Trains ran on precise schedules, never stopping. Factories worked day and night to churn out millions of artillery shells. Entire economies became massive machines designed for one thing: destruction. The skies filled with wood and canvas aircraft. The seas saw giant steel battleships clash in the North Sea. The land was carved into endless systems of muddy trenches. For 4 agonizing years, the fighting did not stop. Machine guns mowed down entire generations in a single afternoon. Victory came at a price that almost ruined the winners. This did not happen because Europe was weak. It happened because Europe was too strong. Its uninterrupted growth had created an unprecedented concentration of people, industry, and military power. The machine was too efficient at killing. The very progress they celebrated became their own undoing. When the guns finally fell silent, the continent was completely exhausted. The cities still stood, the factories could still run, but millions of lives had been erased. History had found a brutal new way to balance the books. The old world was gone, replaced by a landscape of grief. Walk across those silent battlefields today. Look at the endless rows of white crosses stretching to the horizon. The peace of 1918 was not a resolution, it was only a pause. Because as the smoke cleared, the next conflict was already taking shape. A struggle that would decide the fate of the entire world. We are still living in the wreckage of that explosion. The whole world was changed, and the lesson remains. Peace without release valves becomes pressure. Pressure becomes explosion. Explosion becomes history. Europe had become a giant machine. Powerful, complex, fragile. The modern middle class exists because 75 million people died in the 14th century. If the Black Death had missed Europe, your life in 2026 would be completely unrecognizable. Think of a massive catastrophe like a forest fire. Without that fire, the old, suffocating trees keep blocking the light forever. In this alternate timeline, the year is 2026. London is not a city of 9 million people. It is a sprawling, multi-tiered megacity of 38 million. Paris stretches across the entire northern plains of France. Venice is not a sinking museum for tourists. It is a massive, hyper-dense trading hub powered by the exact same merchant families who ruled it in 1347. Because the plague never arrived, the European population did not collapse. It kept growing compounding century after century. This changed everything about how we live, work, and think. In our history, the sudden loss of half the European workforce forced landowners to pay higher wages. It gave peasants leverage. Without that massive labor shortage, feudalism never broke. The old institutions did not crumble. They adapted, slowly, holding on to power for hundreds of years. The nobility kept their grip. The wealthiest merchant families never lost their influence. The Catholic Church still dictates daily life across most of the continent. Ancient cathedrals remain. We have computers. We have satellites orbiting the Earth. We have artificial intelligence, but we reached this point through a completely different path. In our world, labor scarcity drove automation. We built machines because we did not have enough hands to do the work. In this alternate 2026, hands are cheap and abundant. Innovation did not happen in fast-paced corporate labs funded by venture capital. It happened inside the quiet, uninterrupted libraries of universities that have run continuously for 800 years. Progress was a slow, steady climb, not a series of violent revolutions. Walk down the streets of modern Munich or Warsaw in this timeline. You will see towering glass skyscrapers built directly over medieval street grids. The buildings from the 1300s are not historic preserves. People live in them. Families cook dinner in apartments with stone walls thick enough to withstand siege engines. Modern plumbing and fiber optic cables run through masonry laid down before Columbus ever sailed. This world is incredibly stable. It is prosperous, but it is also suffocating under its own weight. Europe faces a crisis of scale. Feeding 1 billion people on a single continent requires massive vertical farms and strict energy rationing. Housing is the single most urgent political issue. Every square inch of land is managed, manicured, and claimed. There are no wild forests left. It forces us to confront a heavy truth. No society escapes the consequences of its history. We only get to choose which consequences we are willing to live with. We built our freedom on empty land left behind by the dead. This alternate 2026 built its stability on crowded continuity. Look at a satellite map of Europe at night in this timeline. The lights form a solid, unbroken web from Lisbon to Warsaw. Millions of lives moving in a rhythm that was never interrupted by a single flea on a black rat. It makes you wonder about the fragile thread of our own reality. Did we get lucky? Or did we pay a different price? The archive closes. The screen fades. But the question remains. The Black Death is the only reason the modern middle class exists. Before the year 1346, Europe was trapped. It was a closed loop. Feudal lords owned everything. Peasants worked themselves to death for scraps. There was no escape, no social mobility, and zero leverage. Bodies piled in the streets. Entire villages vanished. But when the dust settled, the fundamental math of society had changed. Suddenly, labor was scarce. The surviving peasants realized a massive truth. They had leverage. If a lord refused to pay higher wages, they could walk to the next manor. Feudalism collapsed because a germ forced landlords to compete for human beings. Think of it like a crowded room where everyone is fighting for one chair. If you remove half the people, suddenly everyone gets a seat, and some even get a table. But prosperity always demands a heavy price. More people mean more mouths to feed. Land becomes scarce. Food prices skyrocket. The Industrial Revolution never happens. The middle class is never born. Instead, Europe becomes a pressure cooker. By the year 1500, the continent is starving. The forests are completely cleared for farmland. The soil is depleted. One ruined harvest triggers a continental famine. The struggle for resources sparks endless, brutal wars. It is a slow, grinding decline instead of a sudden catastrophe. So, which world is better? The one where millions died quickly, or the one where billions suffered slowly for centuries? History never stops asking for balance. One storm, one voyage, one tiny biological glitch. That is, imagine a timeline where the Roman Empire never fell, or where the steam engine was invented in ancient Alexandria. What about a world where explorers never sailed west, leaving the Americas untouched by European empires? The archivist closes the heavy leather folder. The sound of thick paper meeting paper rings through the empty room. A thin layer of gray dust settles across the dark cover. He slides it back onto the wooden shelf, wedging it between two massive volumes of forgotten years. Then, without a single word, he reaches for another file. Its title remains hidden in the deep gloom of the shelf. The archive falls silent. The air is still, but the questions remain. Keep asking, what if? Because somewhere, every impossible story has already been written. Welcome back, anytime, to the Hidden Archives.